Now today I got several little things to do on the FZR restoration project, and we're going to try to go through these one by one and try to share some of the information we've learned. Now one thing is really important. There's two bolts. Two bolt holes have to be drilled in the seat, and I want to get them super accurate, because if not, the seat doesn't line up on the center line of the bike. And when those holes get too big and sloppy, the seat rattles around and it hurts the camera. The camera mount starts to vibrate. So this is a very precision thing to get those two holes drilled, and I want to share the way I do it. Now, because we have a custom taillight mount that I made with carbon fiber, that's not going to fit in the back. We're going to have to trim some of this away. I don't know how much. I'd like to leave enough that it acts as a reinforcement here. And I checked all of the reinforcements we did with the carbon. Boy, that's a battleship. So all that we did the previous day, the day before, that looks like it worked out great. But these holes, if these holes are off to the front, to the back, the seat can sit crooked. It's very, very important, and that's why I did the reinforcements first. Because if these holes start to elongate and get bigger than they have to be, everything goes downhill very quickly. So step one, as always, is we have to move some of the bikes around, make some room to work. Taking off the seat, relatively straightforward, simple job. And because we don't have a stock taillight, this is a custom part that I made years ago. And luckily I still have the mold for this, because I might want to make another one or a new one or whatever. It's a molded piece. I have to account for that. So the first thing I have to do is get the seat out and check what amount of clearance I have, because until I can get the part to sit down, I'm not going to be able to get an accurate template for the bolts. And you can see on the stock seat just some of the things that I was trying to get rid of. You see how the back, in 5 years, you can see some of the Bondo starts to walk around. And you can see this seat is much thinner in the back. I don't know if I have to make it that thin. But the most important thing is to drill those holes. Not make them oversized, make them just a nice snug fit on a 10mm bolt. And that, it sounds like that would be pretty easy. That becomes a challenging job, because that seat now sits down on the cushion and it makes a nice tight fit around the perimeter, and the bolts just snug it up, and that's how that part goes on. So the first preliminary fitting, I can see that this is not snug up here where it should be. That's got to get moved up. I have plenty of clearance in other places. And what I thought I'd try to do is leave as much of this on as I can. In fact, that can go around there. I've got to trim about 3/4 of an inch or so. So what I'm going to do is make run a little Sharpie marker around here and see how much of this I have to trim away, and then take a small bite out, one little piece at a time, until that piece is a nice snug fit in there. So anytime I'm fitting bodywork parts, and it's always a hit or miss thing. I want to take, it looks like that's the amount. I want to take that off right at the line, and I'm probably going to have to take a little bit extra just for the lens of the tail light that's not stock. But just cutting this out to start with, that'll allow that seat to fit, hopefully fit back a lot closer than it did, because the seat has to fit right in exact position before I can spot those holes and where they have to be. And if they're wrong, boy, does it look hokey, and then you've got to fill in the holes with fiberglass. Oh, you make a nightmare of work. Okay, this is just a cutter, an ordinary Dremel tool cutter that you can buy in Lowe's or any place actually. wanted to show that without a camera cut, because obviously as you go through the carbon fiber reinforcement, it's harder to cut. Now I'm going to get a sanding drum and trim this all off nice. Now an ordinary sanding drum that you can buy in Lowe's, actually all this stuff is very low tech. And if you're going to do this kind of work, you've got to have a few of these tools anyway. I'm using my second hand to brace this. Now what I want to do is, I want to go just do a test fit. Because in the final thing, when we do the final fits and finishes, this edge here along the whole part is a critical thing to having that show quality finish. If you leave razor edges, the paint tends to chip, it tends to then peel up, and we're going to be putting the striping of the bike right around. So not like when you put a sticker, it has to end 1/8 of an inch. This is going to go right around, in at least the paint job I have envisioned so far. So now this is just rough where it should be. I'm probably going to have to take a little more out for the taillight. Let me go do a test fit. Just to mention something that is it's part of this job actually. When I made this part, and I showed this on step 1, getting this fit and finish around here was a critical thing to making it what I think is the best I can possibly make it. All of the fits and finishes, and this is one of the things I want to do when I do this restoration. I want this really, I try to make each one a little bit better of course, but always the fits and finishes. The amount of shine you can put on the part and the amount of even gap you can get. And it looks like it's easy when it's done. It's difficult, and I want to show as this series goes on how I do it. Now it's a lot closer than it was, but it still has to be trimmed enough that this can be pulled forward into that little recess. So what I'm going to do is just take a little more off the back, take 1/8 of an inch at a time until that piece can slide right into position. Maybe a little time consuming, but this is going to be one of those critical fits and finishes. Now to do the final trimming, we have to be right in position, because you can see this part actually rests right on the seat. It seals up here, and getting that to seal up and sit just right, one of the parts that, part that I think is going to be important in this restoration. Now, it took several little grindings and sandings and everything, but it looks like we have that joint real nice, and of course that's one of the things I want it to be real nice. It's important too, of course, if I don't radius all these edges off, the paint's going to chip, so that's another thing. I want to look at this from every angle. This fit here is just about perfect. And this is all the work you really, anytime you do track day body work, the body work is so thin, I want to see that I've got it lined up, because I have an adjustment under there, and I still have clearance for the tail light, just enough. In fact, I could take a little more off, just a little bit. I've got it right. I think that's real close. I'm going to grind a little off for the tail light, and that's it. I think we're home free oil. We'll be ready to set the bolts. You can see what I've done with the Sharpie marker. In fact, what I'll probably do is just make the whole piece of that, cut a little more out. I don't think it's going to look as nice as if I did a nice smooth cut there. So I can just interpolate that and go out and cut it. So again, this is the amount I need to have off, but now I'm going to just interpolate a line around here and go out and trim that off. I just think it'll look nicer from, well, you don't really see this, but if you do crawl on your knees and look up, it'll be nice to have this. I don't want to see a bunch of, I'd rather see one smooth curve there. I'm trying to follow this curve so that we have a bar here. The original part only has about 1/8 of an inch, and you can look up in there and it's hollow. This I think is going to look a lot nicer. And it'll give us a little extra carbon that's inside there. I'll reinforce this, again, making this back as stiff as possible. Again, it's just an ordinary cutter. Nothing high-tech about that. And what's really nice about doing this kind of work is you don't need any really expensive tools. Everything you need is relatively inexpensive to do this whole restoration. You don't need any bridge ports or any lathes, milling machines, but it does take a lot of hand labor. It's just a lot of time and energy. Where that carbon fiber is, it's really reinforced. Really nice and strong. Now, and the last thing, of course, the sanding drum is always a good way to just rough. This is a rough finish. We'll get a hand edge on this. This part of it can be take a little extra time. I'm looking down the back, make sure everything is straight and level. But that worked out nice. It does take a little extra time to do this, and anytime you do track day body work, you've got to do this. The holes aren't drilled when you get the parts, that's for sure. Okay, so now we need to just spot the holes. Now spotting the holes is going to be, I'm having this lined up exactly the way I want it, and then I'm going to take I don't have it with my pocket, I got to get a Sharpie marker and poke a hole through. There's a hole there, and let me do that. Take a Sharpie marker. There's a hole already there, and I want the part exactly. Oh boy, does that line up nice. Wow. So let me just get in there and spot that hole. Okay, so now the trick is going to be to take the part off and get those holes drilled with that cutter, not with a drill. And get it exactly so a 10mm bolt goes right through there. Not a 10mm, a 5mm goes in there. I think it's a 5 or a 6, I got to check, because I want a tight fit. Now just to make doubly sure, I have a Sharpie marker showing me where the hole is, and I'm sticking an ice pick in there and putting a little detent in, just so I know these holes are accurate. Now what I did, I just spotted it with an 1/8 inch hole. So I have an 1/8 inch hole there. And now I want to open it up. Once I take it outside, I want to open it up so it's a nice tight fit for the bolt that's going to go in there. Oh boy, that worked out just perfect. That is really nice. Now, what I always do is get one side done, leave that bolt in there, tighten it up, get it all snugged up, and then I'll do the same thing to the other side. Just like the windshield, and just like sequencing anything, getting one bolt in place. Don't try to just drill the 2 bolt holes randomly. Get one drilled, put the bolt in, and use that to line up the second one. I think you'll have better success most of the time. That's worked pretty well for me over the years. Okay, now by having this bolt tight, it has allowed me to get a super accurate location for the second bolt. Did the same thing, and I've got pretty much the clearance, which should be about 1/8 of an inch along there, so that doesn't scratch. The other thing that's worked out way better than I thought, this seat is way more solid than the other one, which should make for a better video camera mount, among other things. Now the last thing is, now that I have all the final bolts in place, I couldn't do this. See, I have clearance here, no clearance here. Now I'll show how. I want to leave just a little clearance because I don't want that to be rubbing on the seat and from vibration or whatever eventually put a hole in it. Now what I did, I put a piece of blue tape between the seat and between this, and what I'm going to do, just using a Sharpie marker, and this is a really good trick too, I'm going to go around the whole seat. Of course, at some place it's already got a clearance where it doesn't, and it definitely needs a little bit on this side. So this is going to give me, and it's right here that I'm real concerned with. I'm going to take that sanding drum and very, very carefully take the bike apart again. Just make that line disappear. So this is the mount we want to take away with the Dremel sanding drum. Should give us a little nicer fit, but it's really critical again. Every edge where there's an edge, it must be radiused every time you sand, or else you run that risk that, boy, you put the part on, you get a chip here and a big chunk of paint comes up later on. I'm always very careful. And by the way, look how nice those holes lined up in the carbon fiber. That couldn't have been nicer.
Now this is the part where if you take your time in the end of the job, when it's all done and you're ready to take the bike for its first ride, its first show, you'll be so happy you did it. The little fits and finishes. You don't think people are going to notice it, but they do.
So the result of that is going to be a much nicer fit when we do the final sanding. Now, one of the things I always emphasize too when I'm doing this kind of work, you can't rush it. If you try to rush through this and do it in a, I don't know, very short amount of time, you always wind up with something that's butchered up. Now, I had thought in the beginning of the day I was going to be able to get this part wet sanded, and I'm pretty much ready to paint it and prime it, but what's happened is we've lost the weather. It was a little sunnier before. It looks like it's going to rain, and I don't want to compromise this in any way, so this is all I'm probably going to get done in this session until I get another session to work on this. Now I've left the seat and the bolts that hold the original seat on because we haven't really taken a bike apart yet to do the fit of the fairings and everything. That's for another day, of course. But the way this season is played out, we've had some warm days, some cold days, and a lot of rainy days. And I may get a couple more days to ride the bike before the really cold weather sets in. Now we pull it apart, of course. But having that seat fit, this was all the kind of dirty work got done today. This was really, really worth the time, especially because we're losing the weather right now. Now what I always try to do, and it's pretty simple, most of my really close friends know it, I like to ride every day in the summer if I can, or every other day depending on how many days I have to do other things like babysitting. But one of the things, when the cold weather comes, I still like to be able to ride. You get these surprise days. We're coming up on that part of the season where I like to have two things, almost like two separate lives. Try to get a ride in, and of course, the restoration work that I go here in the shop. Before I end the video, this is worth mentioning. This is our favorite place to buy bolts from. And what I did, when I ordered the bolts, I ordered bolts, lock nuts, lock washers, I ordered everything for the windshield, which we've already spotted the holes in. I hope that information that's on a previous video is of some value. But also included in this bag of bolts, I'm going to replace all the bolts that hold the fairing, because some of them have lock nuts, and those lock nuts do wear out because we take this bike apart an awful lot of times for track days and for maintenance and whatever. And what happens is that all of a sudden they're not really lock nuts anymore. So this is a great place to buy bolts. They're only a couple of cents a piece. It's amazing how cheap they are. But that's a great little tip if you take your bike apart a lot, and worth every penny. So this ends part 4. We'll pick this up on part 5. Hope you enjoyed the work here in the shop. Just like being here. That's the whole objective, and our objective is to share information. So again, thanks for watching.